Prologue. We have been promised 1,000 years of peace. We have also been told Jesus would send us a comforter. Where are we going to find this comforter? When are they going to show up? And how can one man or woman make a difference in this world? Really good questions. The religions of the world have tried to answer these questions. We have all had many tests with questions in our lives. I find it difficult to answer those questions from outside sources. I have still walked the path and asked the same questions from my inner sources. This is what has come to my mind when I have searched for answers through prayer and meditation. I believe prayer is talking to God, and meditation is listening to God. I have tried to live the last 20 years in quiet, allowing myself time to hear. We read in the King James's version of the Bible many things concerning the Comforter. John 14:16, "And I will pray for the Father, and he shall give you another Comforter, that he may abide with you forever." John 14:26. "But the Comforter, whom the Father will send in my name, he shall teach you all things, and bring all things to your remembrance, whatsoever I have said unto you." John 15:26. "But when the Comforter comes, whom I will send unto you from the Father, even the Spirit of truth which proceeded from the Father, he shall testify of me." John 16:13. "Howbeit when he, the Spirit of truth, is come, he will guide you into all truth, for he shall not speak of himself. But whatsoever he shall hear, that shall he speak, and he will show you things to come." John 16:10. "Nevertheless, I tell you the truth, it is expedient for you that I go away. For if I go not away, the Comforter will not come unto you. But if I depart, I will send him unto you." This story is about a man named John Taylor. He has a degree in business administration from the University of Washington in Seattle, and has enough credits to call himself an accountant with a minor in finance. He is a third-generation carpenter, and for a decade in his long life was a general contractor. He has been married twice and has had 9 close calls with death in his life. He finds himself in Seattle again. First, he lost his home to the OSO slide on March 22, 2014. He was just getting settled when his neighbor upstairs on March 22, 2018, had a health problem. The fire department estimated that the water had been running for several hours before any evidence showed up downstairs. When the ceiling released a few tons of water, it made a serious mess of John's apartment. John had an all-day meeting and came home being told he could not enter his apartment because of the sheetrock and insulation had given way. John started listing what things he needed and where they were at, and informed the fire department he could not leave without them. After an interesting discussion, the firemen went and got John's list of items and loaded them into John's XB for him. John stayed in a hotel in Linwood and looked for someplace cheap for 3 or 4 months. He found a single room in the University District in Seattle. His money was not going to last, so he looked for something that would pay him. He asked some psychic friends, and that is how he met Dr. Tom Holland during the middle of May 2018. Once again, he was living in the University District in Seattle. It had changed a lot since the early 1970s. Last time John had lived there for a long period. Chapter 1. Seattle, Washington. Peter was walking home after his martial arts class. Today he earned his brown belt. 10 years of training, and his instructor, Master Sun, told him in front of his dojo he was far beyond his brown belt. He'd been held back because he hadn't asked to be tested during the last almost 2.5 years since his mother's sickness and death. Master Sun looked at him and shared he'd been one of his most devoted students over the last 10 years. And in front of all the dojo, Master Sun asked him if he would become the dojo's #1 assistant. Peter realized he would be getting a paying job that would last him through college. Peter talked with Dan just a few days ago. Dan Phillips was current assistant to Master Sun and set to get his BS from the University of Washington, and had been offered a paid internship with Boeing where he could work part-time as an aeronautical engineer assistant and continue working towards his MS at the UW. Peter remembered when Dan had become the #1 assistant 7 years ago. Dan had been offered the position when his predecessor Jim had graduated from the UW and moved on with life. As Peter was walking along, smiling and thinking that maybe he was finally in God's favor, he heard crying. It was faint. Only a trained ear could have heard it above the wind and city traffic. He decided to investigate. His mind said it was familiar. It was May 27, 2018 in Seattle, and the temperature was 48 degrees, but with the wind and rain, the chill factor was probably more like 30 or 35. It was possible to die of hypothermia if one was on the streets and not dressed properly. He stopped and listened again. He was just turning the corner at 50th and Roosevelt, cutting through the grocery store parking lot. The wind was coming right at his back from the west. The building that was home to him and his dad was only 3 blocks towards the east on the corner of 50th and 15th Avers NA. They lived on the top floor in a 6-story building. Their condo in the southwest corner shared the floor with 7 other units, making a total of 40 residential units for the complex, with the street level dedicated to 10 commercial offices. The building had been scheduled to be completed just before the downturn in the economy, and only 6 of the units were occupied. The builder and contractor had both gone bust, and the second, third, and fourth floors were only partially completed, and no one lived on those floors. Peter saw Max, the neighborhood bully, along with 2 of his idiot buddies. They were over by the dumpsters, smoking half-used cigarettes. He was hoping he wouldn't have to deal with them to make his way home. He was about to turn in that direction when he heard the muffled cry again. He looked to his right and saw a lone figure huddled on the ground, wrapped in a heavy dark blue coat. He stopped for a second. The bundle was next to the building, behind a parked van in the grocery store's parking lot. Peter cleared his mind and asked, "Do I get involved?" What his mind heard surprised him. "This is your soul's companion." Peter looked around, wondering who had been talking. It sounded like his dead mother. His mind got a picture of Patty, his neighbor of long ago. Peter had learned to trust his instincts, so he asked, "Patty?" The bundle moved. "Patty?" A little louder this time. The bundle lifted her face and looked at him. In a flash, she was on her feet and had wrapped her arms around him. Peter had never been hit that hard in his life and thought maybe he really could play football as he fought to keep himself and Patty standing upright. "Thank you, God." "Oh, Peter, please help me, please," Patty cried. "Let's get you out of the rain. You're shivering." Peter turned the 2 towards home. "We live about 3 blocks from here." "Wait, I got stuff." Patty turned back to where she'd been sitting. Patty had been sitting on a cloth travel case that had wheels and had another large black plastic garbage bag full of items. Peter picked up the plastic bag and Patty grabbed the handle of the suitcase, and the 2 of them turned east in the direction of where Peter lived. Peter had been paying attention to Patty on his left when he felt something to his right. He dropped the plastic bag and crouched as one of Max's buddies came running at him at full speed. "Patty, get down!" Peter screamed. The first young man, a good 30 to 40 pounds heavier than Peter, seemed to take flight as he met Peter. Peter simply used the man's own inertia and a bit of lift. The man came down hard about 15 feet from where Peter and Patty were. Max's buddy was in agony, and Peter later heard that he'd snapped both bones in his left forearm. He also had a bloody nose, along with knees, hands, and forehead. Max's second buddy came at Peter but tried to stop, so Peter helped him with a forearm to the solar plexus, laying him out on his back, unconscious. Max was next, and Peter had to dance with him for a few seconds before he, too, was down and out. Max was not fully trained but did know some techniques. Peter had always been the smallest in his class and attracted bullies. Therefore, his father took him to the dojo and signed him up to learn self-defense when Peter was 6. Peter looked over at the first victim and frowned when he saw Dan helping him to his feet and out of the driving lane for the parking lot. Dan looked at Peter and smiled with a nod. Patty was wrapped around Peter when Dan came over to talk. "Sorry, you had to see that, Dan." Peter shook his head. "Just when I thought I had my life going well again." "Peter, are you concerned about Master's son?" Dan smiled. "Yeah, I know the rules. No fighting." Peter choked. "Why don't you ask him yourself about what he thinks this was?" Dan smiled and looked towards the corner of the store where he had come from just seconds behind Peter. Everyone saw a policeman and Master's son coming towards them. The policeman was on his radio calling for reinforcements. Soon, Max and his buddies were hauled away. Patty was able to stay out of the limelight and only had to give her name and contact information, Peter's cell number, in case they needed her testimony. Max and his buddies all had juvenile records and had been warned to stay out of trouble. Dan, Master's son, the policeman, and an old guy with a Marine Corps cap all gave statements as to what they had witnessed. Peter faced Master Sun. He bowed and spoke, looking at Master Sun's feet. I have broken your rules, Master Sun. I will remove myself from your dojo tomorrow. Peter said in front of everyone. Master Sun looked first to the policeman and then to Dan. He centered on Peter. Am I mistaken, Peter? I did not see you throw a blow or hurt anyone here in an aggressive manner. All that I observed were you defending the safety of you and this young lady. Officer McCormick, did you see any threatening actions taken by my young student here? No, Master Sun, Officer McCormick responded. He only did what he had to do to protect himself and the young lady. Self-defense in my book. Peter did not look up. Dan? Master Sun asked. No, Master Sun. Dan almost laughed. I concur with Officer McCormick's and your assessment. I believe it is time for you to ask to receive your black belt. I request your father is present when this is to be done. Please advise me when this can be accomplished. Master Sun said in his usual sing-song manner, I expect my #1 assistant to be wise in what we have to teach. You are more than ready. To defend oneself against 4 times your weight is why I originally started my school. Someone else without your training may have ended up near dead with the young lady taken. Yes, sir. Peter was able to breathe again. Master Sun, are these 2 young men an example of your training? Officer McCormick asked, looking at Dan and Peter. Officer McCormick, I have only had a small number of students reach beyond level 1 black belt status. You are looking at 2 of the best. Master Sun turned as the paddy wagon was hauling Max and his buddies away. Although I can confide with you, none of my students have ever ended up where those 3 are going. Master Sun, I will be there in the morning with my 2 sons at 8:30 a.m., Officer McCormick said as he shook hands all around. Officer McCormick, are you going to be able to stay and watch your sons tomorrow? Dan asked while glancing at Peter. Officer McCormick nodded. Peter took the hint. Sir, it is best for the students if the entire family understands what they are doing. I have a daughter who is 3. What about her? Officer McCormick asked, continuing to hang on to Peter's hand as they shook. Peter smiled. Including their little sisters, sir. Officer McCormick looked to Master Sun, who smiled and nodded. I will make it so then, Officer McCormick said as he released Peter's hand. The 4 stood quietly and watched as the last of the officers left and things went back to normal. Well, Grasshopper, will I see you at 8? Master Sun asked. As he looked at Peter, Peter bowed with his hands together and a big smile on his face. Yes, Master Sun. Good. Take care of Miss Donaldson. She is very important to you. Master Sun and Dan turned as one and moved so quickly, it almost seemed as if they were floating. Within seconds, they had turned the corner of the store and had disappeared heading south. Peter and Patty were still standing as Patty asked, How did he know my name? He looks into the future at times and knows things. Peter had the black bag as Patty grabbed her travel case. He knew that Max was going to be here today, and without Master Sun and Dan finding and bringing Officer McCormick, I too may have been arrested for assault. Oh, Patty said. Instead of going to Peter's condo, Peter took Patty into a nearby Starbucks. Once they had ordered and had taken up residence at Peter's favorite table, Peter asked, Why are you here, Patty? What's going on? That girl has the hots for you. Patty looked in the direction of the counter where a good-looking girl with a name tag saying Sandy was working. Peter choked on his coffee, sputtering. Peter said, That's not what I was expecting you to say. After Peter got control of himself again after wiping coffee from his nose, What happened, Patty? It looks like you're running away. Peter noticed tears starting to form in Patty's eyes. Patty took a bite of her pastry and a drink of her hot chocolate and felt the first real food in a day and a half. Sorry, Peter, this is the first thing I've eaten in a while. Peter took half of his banana bread and moved it to Patty's paper plate. We'll stop and get you a burger or something on the way home. Peter thought about how he had said home. His unsaid meaning was our home. I think my sister is gone. I think she was taken. No, I think she was sold to some bad men. Patty's sister was her stepsister. Jenny was 6 months older than Patty, and they seldom did anything together and ran in different crowds, even though they were in the same class together. It started 2 weeks ago. Mom found some stuff in Jenny's room, and they had a really bad fight. It was dinner time and she hit Mom in the face and bloodied her nose, and she even pulled a steak knife on Dad. Dad took it away from her and threw her across the dining room so hard that when she hit the wall, a picture fell off and broke. Tears were streaming down Patty's face now. Dad was so mad. I thought the chair was going to break when he slammed her into it. He told Mom to get some rope, and Jenny tried to make a break for it, and Dad hit her so hard with his open hand across her face, it sounded like a gun going off. All the time, Jenny was saying over and over that the stuff was not hers. "Is she all right?" Sandy interrupted with a heated jelly roll in her hand while looking at Patty. Sandy had been trying to get this good-looking guy to notice her for a while now. It took her almost a year to find out he was into martial arts and even gone to the same high school as she had. Sandy motioned with the paper plate with the jelly roll, and Peter nodded his head. Peter said, "Thanks, I'm a friend. We used to live next to each since we were 3 or 4 years old, and she was there for me when my mom died 2 years ago." "That's when you moved into this neighborhood," Sandy said, sitting down next to Patty and putting her arms around her. Sandy asked Peter without making a sound, "Name?" "Dad and I couldn't stand living in Mom's house, so we sold it and moved nearby." Peter added, "Patty is the sister I never had." "What's wrong, Patty?" Sandy hugged her. "I think they sold my sister, and I overheard them talking to the same guy again. I think his name is Rasmussen, and they mentioned my name. I think they are going to sell me too." With that, the stress of 2 days came to a head, and Patty cried her eyes out. When she became aware again, she was sandwiched between Peter and Sandy. "Do you have a place to hide her?" Sandy asked, looking over Patty at Peter. "Yes, I have the perfect spot." Peter nodded. "Get her off the street. Don't let her pop up again for at least 2 weeks or maybe even a month." Sandy was thinking as she went, "Don't break your routine, like coffee in here Sunday mornings, school, and your martial arts training." Sandy thought for a minute. "In 2 weeks after she becomes less hot, maybe I can bring my uncle into this and he can help." "How old are you, Patty?" 15. "I'll be 16 in a few days, May 21st. Patty had gathered up all the napkins and was wiping her eyes. "Why would your parents sell you?" Peter asked. "Or your sister?" "They've been doing drugs." Patty choked. "Dad doesn't have a job anymore. My stepsister and I didn't get along, but she wasn't into drugs. Jenny kept accusing them of planting the drugs." "Would they really do that?" Peter asked. "I thought your dad was on medical leave." "He was suspended because he tested positive for drugs. They just told everyone it was medical leave. All last year, first he was into counseling, and then he went to a rehab place. And then when he tested positive for the 3rd or 4th time, he was terminated or blacklisted or whatever they call it. And I think we are about to lose our home. When Mom died, Dad drank for a month, and before he went back to work, he went in and got his own test. He didn't drink for 3 days, just coffee and water for 3 days and a lot of vitamin C." Peter looked off into space as he thought out loud. His dad had been working 12-hour days, 7 days a week ever since. His dad had buried himself in work 5 weeks after his mom had passed away with cancer. Peter remembered, she was fine one day, and then she went through a time of being tired, and then she went to the doctor, and after that, she went to more tests, and then they were told she had cancer, and then more tests, and then she died. All within 6 months. "What does your dad do?" Sandy asked. "You've seen those giant cranes down at the waterfront that loads and unloads ships?" Peter asked. "Oh," Sandy looked at Patty. "Your dad?" "He used to run crews unloading the ships." Patty sniffled. "With Peter's dad." "Okay." Sandy looked at her watch. "Yipes, you guys need to scoot now." Sandy said, "My uncle is a detective on the Seattle police force, and this is his beat, and he usually comes in around 6 o'clock for coffee and a pastry." Peter and Patty made ready to go as Sandy brought a plastic bag to put the uneaten pastry and banana bread into. "Peter, better not tell your dad." "They still might be close," Sandy shared. "Thanks, I agree. Better safe than sorry." Peter picked up the pastries and black bag. "Thanks, Sandy." As Peter and Patty left the coffee shop, he turned his awareness on and opened all his senses to feel any threats or even if anybody was watching. They only had 4 blocks to go, and he was going to use his key to enter the emergency exit at the back of their condo building instead of the more frequently used front entrance on 50th Street. It would mean using the stairs, but there was a good chance no one would see them once they made it into the building. They crossed 50th Street and headed south on Roosevelt, and then east on 49th Street. "Patty, give me your suitcase and walk ahead of me about half a block. No one is looking for a runaway guy, but they might be for a runaway girl." "Where are we going?" Patty asked. Peter pointed east. "See that six-story building 2 blocks over? Just go straight until you see the regular door next to a garage door." Peter backed the two of them up the little-used residential part of 49th Street, so they were not on the corner in plain view unless someone was driving through the intersection. Patty moved to the corner and headed across the 3 lanes of Roosevelt as the traffic headed south. Peter held his breath as his friend made it to safety by just a slim margin of not being hit by a truck. As Peter saw Patty waiting for him half a block away, it was his turn to cross. The traffic seemed to eliminate any possibility of safely making it across. "Shall we go together?" an older man with white hair and a white beard asked. Peter noticed where some people might have dark circles around the eyes. This man had almost white circles. The man had a Marine Corps cap on. Peter thought he looked familiar, but for the moment could not place where he had seen him. "Sure, Fath," Peter started to answer. "You may call me Father John if you so choose." Father John smiled. "Although we have had many names over eons of time, my name during this lifetime has been John Taylor." "Are you a minister?" Peter asked as they shook hands. The giggle that Peter heard was almost drum-like as he nodded his head yes. "Like you, I am simply a child of God, making his way home. My intention is simply to help a few others by pointing the way." When the two of them stepped to the top of the curb, Peter felt almost as if a miracle had been performed. The traffic stopped and allowed them a safe crossing. As soon as they were across the street, Peter looked back and did not understand how all 3 lanes of traffic seemed to be moving at the speed limit. Peter shook his head and continued. He was glad to see Patty moving ahead of them in the right direction. "What do you do for a living, Father John?" Peter asked. "I'm a retired accountant, but I'm also a 3rd-generation carpenter, and I always will be a carpenter at heart. I'm following another carpenter of long ago." John shared and then asked, "What do you want to be when you finish college?" "I don't know. My mom died 2 years ago, and since then time feels like it has stood still." Peter shared. "Didn't you want to study all the religions of the world once upon a time?" Father John asked. "I did once, but if I become an engineer, I can make a lot more money." Peter shared as he looked in the direction of Patty. "Follow your dreams. You will have no concerns for money." Father John stopped at the next corner and looked at Peter when he said this. Peter quietly said, "Wow." He glanced again at Patty, thinking about what he really wanted to do in this life. "Father John, you don't even know my name." "I believe your name is Peter, although that is what I called you long ago in another time, another life." Father John smiled as Peter confirmed with a nod of his head. Peter and Father John continued without incident until they reached the corner of Peter's building. "In 3 days, you will be confronted with 2 armed men. You cannot take them in a head-on battle. You must wait until they have their guard down. Your abilities are better than the bigger of the 2, but the smaller man is equal to or better than you. Be patient, and then be ruthless. These 2 men are wanted in other states for major offenses. Take care of the young lady and tell her to take notes. Her name will be on a book very soon. Your mother is very proud of you and says to tell you she loves you and says to tell you June 21st, 2016, 10 o'clock a.m., so you would understand." The gentle old man brought his 2 hands together as if he was going to pray and slightly bowed his head. "Blessings and namaste." He then turned north toward the front of the building. Peter stood there for a moment, totally in awe. He had been hit by Max twice, and that pain was gone. Each time his hand had touched Father John's, he had felt an electrical charge go through him. He also had a feeling that everything was going to be all right no matter what. Peter was still looking north, even though the old man had made 50th Street and had turned right to the front of the building, disappearing from Peter's view. "Peter, are you all right?" Patty asked as she touched his right arm. "He gave me a message that my mother was very proud of me and that she loves me," Peter said, only turning to look at Patty as he said, "She loves me." "How do you know if the message was from your mother?" Patty asked, frowning, as she took the handle of the suitcase. The message from Mom also included the date and time that she died, Peter said as if in a daze. Was that in the newspaper? Patty asked as they headed towards the back door. The date, but not the time, Peter said as he reached into his pocket for his keys. When he had the door open, he and Patty looked at each other for a minute. He finally shook himself and moved the two of them through the door and up the stairs to the first landing. Patty saw the light switch and turned it on. Nothing happened. The only light came from a series of small windows, one placed above each landing. The contractor and the owner have both gone bankrupt. The building is not finished. There is nobody on the second floor, and I should be able to hide you there. Peter took them down a poorly lit hallway and then looked around and put his key into the lock of one of the 8 doors. I use this apartment as my personal space. Peter led Patty into an unfinished unit. There wasn't even a number affixed to the door. The walls were unpainted, and scraps of carpet partially covered the floor. I put the doors on and laid the carpet on the floor so I could do tumbles and practice falls. There are only 2 lights that work, but the kitchen all works and the heat works. Patty was standing on the unrolled carpet that covered the main room. She followed Peter's action as he took his tennis shoes off before he stepped up onto the thick layer of the unrolled carpet. There are 3 layers of padding and 2 layers of carpet here. It'll make a nice bed. I didn't get any sleep last night, Patty said as she yawned. I'll go to the store and get you some things to eat, Peter shared as Patty dumped her black bag out onto the carpet. She had a small blanket, a pillow, and a teddy bear that Peter had given her as a birthday present when she was 10. Also, the black bag was a backpack that had seen better days. One of the shoulder straps was ripped off and just hung pointing to the floor when Patty moved it. With the bear under her arm, Patty came over and kissed Peter on the cheek. The bear was caught between them when she hugged him. Both Patty and Peter jumped when they heard a knocking that seemed just a bit too quiet for the door to the apartment where they were. They overheard voices from the floor below. "Hello, Mr. Taylor. Come on in and have a seat." "Thank you, Dr. Rollins, for seeing me this late at night." Patty whispered, "Peter, what's going on? Who is Dr. Rollins?" "Call me Tom." "May I call you John?" "John is fine." "If you could please take a few minutes to fill this out. While you do that, can I fix you some tea?" "That would be great, Tom." Peter took Patty into one of the bedrooms where they could not hear the conversation going on below them. "I'm sorry, Patty." "No, wait for a second, Mr. Taylor. John must be that Father John guy." Peter shook and pulled Patty into another hug. "That Father John guy told me to have you take good notes because you would be writing a book with the information. I've only heard voices a couple of times before. Over by the window is still open to the floor below. Remember, the contractor went bust before a lot of things were finished." "A book? Wow, I do like to write." "Okay, while you are at the store, you had better get me some more notepads too. Please." "I'm sorry I don't have any money, Peter." "Dad has been giving me money to pay the bills and buy food. He gives me extra, and I have been earning some at the dojo as the janitor and part-time teacher, and now I'm going to be getting a job as one of Master Son's assistants. I'm okay with money, but I have to go to work in the morning. What do you want for breakfast?" "Maybe some breakfast bars and those bottled coffee drinks." Patty thought and added, "Maybe some lunch meat and bread, so I can make a sandwich for lunch." "Okay, be back soon." Peter headed for the door. At the door, he turned and smiled at Patty. "Everything is all right." Patty smiled. "I know, and I owe you my life." Peter smiled back and turned and left. Patty made her way back into the main room. She opened her backpack and took out a well-used notepad and several pens. She had taken off her coat and now put it around her shoulders as she figured out where the best spot to listen to the conversation from the office below would be. She also took out her good old laptop and plugged it in. "John, do you take anything in your tea?" "I apologize for only having Earl Grey. I only use this office for my past life research. The grant funding this research requires I have certain overhead, and this is a lot easier for me to get to. I only live a few blocks from here. I tape our sessions and have them transcribed, and I will give you a copy of the transcriptions once they are typed up. The grant will cover 10 sessions, although if there appears to be additional interesting information, I can expand it to 20 or even 30 sessions." "Tom, do you have someone to type up our sessions?" "No, not yet. I thought by offering $10 per hour to be able to work either here or at home, that I would have had several of the UW students to choose from. But as it turns out, nobody applied. I just met a young lady who during a past life was Perpetua, St. Peter's wife. I'm sure she would be interested in making a few dollars on the side. You, you're certain she is, or she was Peter's wife? Yes, very certain, just as I am certain that you are an expression of the doubting Thomas. Oh, you are perceptive. My wife does not even know that little tidbit. That's right. Nancy the psychic did suggest I use you in my research. Did Nancy tell you that I was the doubting Thomas? No. She simply said that I was to begin with you. John paused. Are there any restrictions in my using whatever comes from this research, say, in some sort of publication? None. My grantor wants whatever we find to be made public. How do we begin? When we met on Saturday, I laid the primary hypnotic regression, taking you down through the alpha level into the theta state of your subconscious mind. Tonight, I will first get you comfortable and then put you into a deep, deep trance back to where we were on Saturday. Patty had tears in her eyes again for the umpteenth time in 2 days. Only this time it felt like she was getting some answers and they were happy tears. Maybe, just maybe, Peter is correct and everything was going to be all right. Patty's back straightened and her shoulders squared as she felt her resolve firm up. How would she be able to tell Peter that she was either very sick or maybe with a child? That seemed so impossible since her hymen was still intact. Although that dream with the angel still bothered her. Hopefully, it was because she couldn't stomach what in hell was going on with her family. Dr. Rollins quietly led Father John to a special place and then into another golden place. After many minutes of the quiet talking, Dr. Rollins said, "Let's take you back to the first time you were incarnated on this planet. Yes, we have the entire Akashic record for this individual." What? Who am I talking to? This was not in the rule book regarding the regression of patients. This voice was different from John Taylor's. Dr. Rollins's first thought was to call the whole thing off, except Nancy had told him he would be involved with something important. We are known as the White Eagle. We are a group of souls that work in the fifth dimension with the one that carries the name White Eagle. Long ago, White Eagle was the chief and medicine man of the Malisite Indian nation located in and around St. John, Canada, on the east coast on the Bay of Fundy. This incarnation was during your 3rd century before the red man met the white man. Is there a connection between this individual here now with me and you? Yes, we are one and the same. Have there been other incarnations on this planet? Yes. We are looking for information. Can you elaborate on the answers, please? Yes, we have incarnated into the 3rd density and or the 3rd dimension 392 times on planet Earth during the last cycle. Cycle? What is a cycle? A cycle is made up of 3 great years which are equal to 25,800 Earth years each. This cycle ended on December 21st, 2012. In Revelations chapter 20, John the Beloved spoke of 1,000 years of peace. When will this begin? It is in transition and began with the ending of this cycle. Graduation is upon you. Ascension is a necessary step to becoming a Christ-level being. Jesus was the example, and now it is time for the people of planet Earth to ascend. This transitional period will be 30 or so years longer, with the planet ascending into the 4th dimension. Your Bible calls this heaven on earth. A comforter will emerge and help rid the planet of the negativity to allow this to happen. Dr. Tom had some prepared questions, and he shook his head and decided to move on. Have any of those lifetimes been cut short where the life was ended before reaching the age of 16? Yes, 42 lifetimes have been cut short because the probability of success for that life had reached 0, and only the possibilities of negative karma were present. 17 times the entity was sacrificed for the benefit of the community. Of the other 350 or so lives, have there been any as a slave, as a black person, as a person of Asian descent, as an American Indian, and what percent as a male and as a female? 13 times this aspect has known slavery. 10 of those times the entity was born into slavery. 12 times the entity died as a slave. This entity was of the black race 6 times, the Asian races a total of 16 times, Mongolian 3, Tibetan 5, Japanese once, Chinese 5, Cambodian twice, the American Indian 14 times. The Atlanteans 17 times, the Lemurians 21 times, the Mayans 6 times, the Aztecs 4 times, as a European 17 times, as a South American 3 times, as a modern American 6 times, a South Pacific Islander 4 times. This only covers the last 5,059 or so years, although since coming here from Mars this expression has been a male 320 times, as a female 72 times. Does this fulfill the question? Yes, for now I will want to explore more later. Thank you. Oh, have you ever had a life in Australia? Yes, but it did not meet primary intention. What is the primary intention? We came to Earth to continue to accomplish the lessons started on Mars, to recognize that all are children of God and all on the planet at this time can ascend to the fourth density and/or dimension. What are the requirements to ascend at this time? To love self, to love all others, to love our Father, and to choose to ascend. One has to be 51% positive. Will children ascend? As a general rule, the children will have a much easier time than adults. Back to the entity that is here. Has the entity been to war or been in battles? During 200 lifetimes, this has been true. How many times has this entity showed up in history? We see the entity as frontman on 40 or more occasions, but has supported others behind the scenes during almost all of his other lives. Why has the entity worked behind the scenes so often? To accumulate what you would call IOUs or credits that he could cash, to ensure maximizing the result at this time. Those lifetimes where he did step forward were to make major changes in the direction society was headed. Often as a result, the love he has created overshadowed the hate and fear created. How many times has this entity ascended on this dimension on this earth? 3 times, as a support to Moses, as support to Buddha, and as support to Jesus. During the life of Jesus, who was he? He was known as John, the beloved of Jesus, son of John, Zebedee and Salome, sister to Mary, brother to James and cousin to Jesus and James and cousin to John the Baptist. Did he write the book of John in the Bible and Revelations? Yes, he wrote the book of John, but he dictated the book of Revelations to his disciple Prochorus, who in a previous life was Peter's wife Perpetua, who is now known as Patty and will play an important role in the future. Why was there such a difference in writing styles between the book of John and Revelations? Book of John was written by John in 32 AD during desperate times with much fear, and Revelations was dictated during 73 AD when John believed he was being protected by God. During the time of Moses, who was he? Joshua. Wait, if you are saying that Joshua ascended, who then led the Israelites to the Promised Land? Joshua had a son, also known as Joshua. He was also known as Adam and Jesus. So John and Jesus were together during the time of Moses, his father and son? Yes, that is correct. Have John and Jesus been father and son before or since? As Adam and the one called Abel. Wow, who was John during the time of Buddha? The world does not know of this one then. He was called Buddha-san by those around him. During the time of Jesus, when and where did he ascend? When John the Beloved reached 100 years, he left for the Himalayas and resided there for an additional 57 years before ascending. Is there a better name to call this entity at this time? This entity has come to be known as the Comforter. He has come to be the return of John as prophesied by Jesus. He will be known as John the Christ, the water-bearer for the age of Aquarius. Jesus called this man Johannan Boanerges. The world will know him as John the Christ, the Comforter. Why were John and James called sons of thunder? Because John Zebedee the Senior was an expression of Thor. Then are you an aspect of Thor? No, we are not. You will find this one as Apollo in your mythology. If John was Apollo, then who was Zeus? Jesus! Can you show this doubting Thomas a sign, like a lightning bolt hitting the center of the street? Boom! The good doctor found himself on the floor. The lights blinked him twice, but then stayed on. Emergency services got several phone calls, and Seattle City Light had to send out emergency crews to restore the 3 transformers shorted out nearby on 50th NE. The police shut down the street and rerouted traffic until they were replaced. The only reason the building still had power was its power feed came from 49 St. NE. Dr. Rollins, are you all right? What happened? Why are you under your desk? I think I spilled my tea. Patty would have been looking right at it, except Peter had the blinds in the closed position on all the windows. Even so, the entire condo lit up and the thunder rattled everything. Patty wrapped her coat around herself and peeked out in case there was another lightning bolt. She heard what the doctor had asked for and had seen the result. She started to count the things that could be considered miracles, but was almost asleep when Peter came in. "Hi, did you see the thunder and lightning?" Peter asked. "Uh-huh," Patty said. Peter got on his knees and asked, "Are you all right, Patty?" "Yes, you told me I was going to be," Patty answered with a big smile. "Going to be what?" Peter frowned. "All right. You said I was going to be all right." Patty snickered as she looked at Peter's confused face. "Did you see the lightning?" Peter asked. "Yes, it was right outside the window." Patty pointed to the north-facing window. The two kids went over to the window and peeked out. They didn't recognize the glow in the middle of the street. It looked like a reflection of a streetlight in a puddle of rainwater. Only the streetlights had not come on yet. The sun was in the western sky, still 2 hours before total darkness. "Come see what I got for you." Peter moved away from the window and turned on the light over the stove. He proceeded to pull out a loaf of whole wheat bread, 6 cans of tuna, 6 each of tomato and chicken noodle soup, turkey lunch meat with a small jar of mustard, and another quart-sized jar of mayo, 2 boxes of breakfast bars, a can opener, and a package of plastic spoons, knives, and forks. In another sack was a 6-pack of assorted coffee drinks. In another grocery sack, he had 6 bananas and a bag of purple seedless grapes. "Oh, Peter!" Patty threw her arms around Peter's head and planted a long, loving kiss on his lips. "Thank you. I can survive for a week on this. I also brought you this." He picked up another plastic grocery sack that held a 4-pack of toilet paper, a bar of soap, plastic bowls and toothbrush and toothpaste. The last item out was a small digital recorder with a flash drive. "Father John asked if you would be willing to transcribe this. He said he would make sure you got $20 for each session, and the next one is next Friday." Patty slumped to the floor. "Are you all right?" Peter asked as he knelt next to Patty. "Uh-huh. I always do that whenever I see 3 or 4 miracles happen in one day." Patty giggled. "Miracles? What?" Peter asked. "First I was trying to find you and you found me. Then you saved me from those guys on the street." Patty shivered. "Those bad guys, then Dr. Holland." "Dr. Rollins," Peter corrected. "Right, then Dr. Rollins asked Father John for a lightning bolt right where it happened, and then you bring me the ideal job that I can do and still stay hidden." Patty chuckled. "Dr. Rollins asked Father John for a lightning bolt?" Peter asked. "Yes, Dr. Tom Rollins was the doubting Thomas, and our Father John was John the Beloved and an expression of Apollo, and that is why John and James were called sons of thunder, because their father was an expression of Thor. So Dr. Tom asked for a demonstration of a lightning bolt, and bang, it happened just as he finished asking for it. Patty, I just had a shiver go through me. I think this Father John may be some sort of prophet." Peter shivered again. "We may be in danger. Society often kills messiahs and prophets and all their disciples. Even John the Baptist got his head chopped off. Peter, I think we need to do this." With Peter's help, Patty got back to her feet. "Just by being near him, we have seen 4 miracles today. Jesus did all kinds of miracles, and they still nailed him to a cross." "What else did you hear?" Peter asked. Patty looked down. St. Peter had a wife, and her name was Perpetua. Patty stood straight. "My legal name is Perpetua." Patty was moving to her bag. In it was her birth certificate. She handed it to Peter. "I think we plan to be together. Again." Patty put her arms around Peter and rested her head against his chest as he studied the birth certificate. "Patty, 3 times today I have had messages about you, first from Master Son, then again from Father John, and now again it sounded like my mother. Take care of Patty. She is important to you." Peter inhaled. "I guess I can add to the miracle list with Master Son and Dan showing up when they did, and me getting a job that, with a few loans and or a scholarship or 2, will put you and me through college." Peter did not want to worry Patty, but he was very concerned about his dad and those that may be looking for Patty.